The Amazing Spider-Man was released in 2012 and is directed by Marc Webb and stars Andrew Garfield, Emma Stone, Rhys Ifans and several other people, and is a reboot of the Spider-Man franchise. I'm just gonna get it out of the way now, I really don't like this movie. When I first saw it, I thought it was okay, but unfortunately the more I see this movie, I just think it gets a lot worse. And the main problem I have with this movie is that they really should not have done it. They really should not have made this movie whatsoever. First of all, even though Spider-Man 3 isn't the best movie in the world, I think that original trilogy is fine as it is. It doesn't need to be changed or added on at all, and they don't need to do anything with Spider-Man for a long time, which is where my second complaint comes in, which is the fact that this reboot came along way too quickly. Spider-Man 3 came out in 2007, and The Amazing Spider-Man came out in 2012. That is such a short gap to reboot a franchise. I mean, if you're going to reboot a franchise like that, you would at least give it another 10 years until you do something with it. You don't do it a couple years down the line because people still have Spider-Man 3 fresh in their heads, whether they liked it or not. You at least give them enough amount of time to try and forget about the last one, so you can then go, oh, by the way, you remember we have Spider-Man? Here's the new movie. You don't just do it straight out the bat. Now, before I completely rip this movie apart, I do think there are one or two things that I actually quite liked about this movie. The first one being what they do with Peter's parents. In the original trilogy, you don't know who his parents are except their names. You don't really see them or know about them or anything. And it was good for what they were going for because it gives it a little bit more mystery, and to be honest, Uncle Ben and Aunt May are supposed to be the father and mother figure, so they're kind of replacing them. But here, you actually see a lot more of his parents, even though they're actually not properly in the movie. You know a bit more about them, and then there's a bit more mystery behind those characters. And I thought the way they go about that is quite interesting, because I personally do want to know more about Peter's parents. The other thing I thought was pretty good in this movie was Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man. Not Peter Parker, I'll get onto that in a minute. But whenever he's Spider-Man, he's really good. He gives a lot of funny jokes when he's fighting bad guys, and for the most part, that is the Spider-Man we were wanting to see. Apart from that, though, I really don't like this movie, and the main problem I have with it is that I think it's really boring. Yeah, every time I watch this movie, I just find it really uninteresting, and I usually end up watching something else instead. Now, like I just said, I quite enjoyed Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man, but not so much as Peter Parker. Peter Parker is supposed to be this somewhat socially awkward nerd that can occasionally quit back at times, but there's supposed to be a definitive contrast between the newspaper working geek that is Peter Parker and the quip joking superhero that is Spider-Man. In this movie, you can't really tell them two apart, and whenever he's Peter Parker, he's way too cocky than he needs to be, which kind of ruins the character in my opinion. Also, whilst we're talking about characters, I personally think Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone don't have any chemistry whatsoever. They look cute as a couple. That's about it. Denis Leary is okay as the police chief, also playing Gwen Stacy's dad, but again, he's not that great. And the biggest problem for me is Rhys Ifans as Dr. Connors, or the Lizard. I think he's a really good actor, but unfortunately he's not doing as much as he can do with a role like this. I mean, if they went a certain way with it, he could have so much fun with this role, but unfortunately, every time he's on screen, it's just so boring to watch. And I just gotta say, when he does transform into the Lizard, it looks awful. Like, the CGI is fucking bad. It looks like a rejected Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle from one of the new Michael Bay movies. It's honestly that bad. Uncle Ben and Aunt May in this movie are fine. They were honestly a lot better in the original trilogy because they had a lot more to do and they were a lot more likeable. Here, they're either very grumpy or they're just really boring like most of the characters in this movie. So they're not really given much to do in the first place, which is a shame because they're easily the most interesting characters in the original trilogy and the comics. What else don't I like about this movie? I really don't like the CGI in this movie. I think they're a bit too reliant on it. But trust me, it gets a lot worse in The Amazing Spider-Man 2. The fight sequences are at times enjoyable, but are mostly lackluster. There's a really enjoyable one in a library. That's about it, though. Some of the things that the characters do, especially Peter Parker, are quite stupid. And the final battle is, again, pretty lackluster and is very cliched. And I really don't like it. However, everything I just said is nothing nearly as bad as the plot. And it's probably the biggest and most annoying thing that I don't like about this movie, because the plot is pretty much the exact same as the 2002 Spider-Man movie. Yeah, it's exactly the same thing. It's the exact same things that happen. The only difference is that the love interest is different and the villain is different. That's pretty much it. If you're not quite sure what I'm on about, then let me explain. In the original movie, the movie pretty much goes like this. Peter gets bitten by a spider. He gets his powers. He tries to figure out what those powers do. Uncle Ben gets shot. He gets mad and begins being Spider-Man. He tries to fall in love with Mary Jane, but things get in the way. The villain then, gets in the way of that as well, and they fight and the movie's over. And that's pretty much The Amazing Spider-Man as well. Peter Parker gets bitten by a spider. He gets these powers and he's trying to figure out what to do with them. Uncle Ben dies again. He becomes Spider-Man. He falls in love with, this time, Gwen Stacy. Things happen with them. And then he fights the bad guy at the end and wins. What can I say? That's pretty bad for a reboot. You don't just copy the same formula, and we really do not need to see Uncle Ben die twice. If we've seen it done before, we don't need to see it done again, which is the exact same complaint I have about a lot of the Batman movies. We don't need to see Bruce Wayne's parents getting killed again. We've seen it a million times before in the comics, in the games, in the movies, and even in TV shows. We don't need to see it again, and the same goes for Uncle Ben's death. As you can tell, I really don't like The Amazing Spider-Man, and I think it's a real shame because Marc Webb's first movie, 500 Days of Summer, is my favourite romantic comedy ever, and I've watched it loads of times and I still find it really fun and really enjoyable to watch. There's so much creativity and enjoyment put into that film compared to The Amazing Spider-Man, where it's just bland and boring and really uneventful. What happened, man? What happened? So with all of that being said, I'm going to give The Amazing Spider-Man a 4 out of 10. I really don't like it. I just don't. So guys, that was my review of The Amazing Spider-Man. I hope you enjoyed it, because if you did, give that video a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Bye.